We're going to see more and more kind of systemic efforts to upskill teachers, to integrate it into the classroom so that students know how to use this and use it appropriately.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech podcast button at the top of the page. Today's episode is sponsored by my new free quiz, Unlock the Best Way to Use Chatbots in Your Teaching. This quick 5-question quiz will help you figure out the best way to use AI this school year. Find out if AI can support your instructional planning and help you tackle your to-do list. Everyone who takes the quiz will also get a free ebook. Head to classtechtips.com/quiz to find my new quiz. Unlock the best way to use chatbots in your teaching. That's classtechtips.com/quiz. This week's episode is titled Things to Watch in AI in Education in 2025 with Dan Fitzpatrick, and I'm excited to start the year with this conversation. Dan and I were both guests on a webinar for FETC last year. Speaking of FETC, if you're headed to Orlando for that conference in a few weeks, send me a message and I'll send you my schedule. But on this webinar that Dan and I were both on with a few others, we both shared some tips and strategies related to AI in education. So when Dan reached out to me this fall and let me know about his new book, it comes out yesterday, if you're listening to this the day that it goes live, I knew he would be a great guest to help kick off 2025. So let's dive into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Dan. I am so excited to chat with you today about some things to watch in AI in education this year in 2025. So as we get ready to get to our list, can you tell listeners a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so I left the classroom about 2 years ago now. So I moved into leadership within college education. Before that, I had trained as a high school teacher. I'd worked in high schools, then on leadership in high schools, then moved into leadership within college education, working on digital strategy and innovation. It was there that I kind of started doing a lot of work with artificial intelligence, and then ChatGPT obviously broke onto the scene about 2 years ago and kind of changed the world as we know it, I guess, over the last 2 years. And so I've been able to kind of help and support schools, colleges, universities, and businesses around the world since then with their kind of upskilling and strategic integration of this technology.
Yeah, and it's been a wild few years of just changes in ed tech and in all sorts of industries that are, considering what role AI will play. So, today we're talking about AI in education, top things to watch in 2025. But before we dive in, can you tell us a bit about your journey into writing about AI in education? I know you've got a new book and some prior publications. What inspired you to focus on this intersection between AI and education?
Yes, so over the years, I suppose, like many of us, one of my passions has been educational technology and really using it for good. And I contributed to other books over the last few years, and always kind of thought, right, I need to. I had a few ideas for books myself,
Mhm.
but I don't know, because obviously you write your own books as well. I was at first it was the motivation really, especially when you're working day to day in a classroom anyway, and then to do a big project on the side is really difficult. And so I suppose the big thing came for me was when I started doing a lot of work around AI with
Mhm.
schools. I got asked by a publisher to write a book, and that kind of, I suppose that then gave me the kind of incentive and the external pressure to meet
Mhm.
deadlines. And also it caught me at a moment where I was really, really excited about
Yeah.
this. And also it was kind of like that and the marriage of people wanted to know about it. So
Yeah.
this was kind of very early 2023. And so kind of those few things kind of joined perfectly and came together. And so I wrote the first book, The AI Classroom,
Mhm.
and have written a small guide between now and then, which came out at the start of this academic year. And then over the last 2 years, while I've been working with schools, I've been putting together a book that's more about strategy, about how do we not just innovate in terms of how do we use these tools to help us in our everyday existence system, but how might we need to innovate in terms of re-looking at the system of education in a world that has AI. So it's a bit more higher level, but it
Mhm.
also is very practical in terms of how do you actually go about approaching what I call a non-linear style of innovation.
Mhm. And I think that combination of something that's big idea, big picture with the more practical, actionable tips is really what people want, for something like this topic where they're trying to wrap their head around it. They're trying to understand what this means for them. And then having those action items, right? Or those pieces that feel more practical, I think are so crucial. So, together today, I'm hoping we can get into, your list of things to watch, if you will. I love this kind of framing as we enter the new calendar year. So as we think about some things to watch in AI and education, what is up first for you?
Yeah, well, I guess I think we're gonna see another monumental year in terms of how AI develops, and then also how we use artificial intelligence. So I don't think we're gonna see in like how we use it completely change. I just think we're still going to be
Mhm.
using tools like we use them now, but the ability of them are going to increase. So we're already starting to see as the end of this year. Well, it's the start of it. If it's the start of the year, isn't it? So
Mhm.
I just give away that we're recording at the end of.
I think everyone knows, right, or assumes that we
Yeah,
are not
I think the
meeting on the
Christmas
New Year's
jumper kind of
morning, right?
gives it away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So start of this new year in 2025, I think we're going to pick up where we left off at the end of last year in terms of moving towards, and you hear this a lot if you kind of follow AI news, more what we call agentic artificial
Yeah.
intelligence.
Mhm.
So artificial intelligence that doesn't just do kind of one thing. Over the last couple of years, we're kind of getting used to these AIs that'll just specialize in text or educational tool that'll create a resource for a lesson or create an image. I think we're going to start seeing more and more tools that will be able to complete full tasks at every stage.
Mhm.
I think we're going to start just starting to settle down and knowing that, well, actually this technology exists around us now,
Yeah.
and just being comfortable with that. And I think that'll probably be the start of then going, well, how do we then properly strategize for this as within education? How do we actually prepare our students? Because I can really understand that a lot of schools have been a bit apprehensive to approach this topic so far because it's hard to get a grip of, because it's moving so fast, and also public opinion shifts from day to day on this is amazing to, oh my goodness, this is an ethical crisis, and then the next day it's amazing. And so trying to capture it is really difficult. I think things might settle down a little bit into this new year, and schools will feel a bit more confident because there'll be more resources created. I was just looking at a story this morning about how in Philadelphia they're creating a 3-tier professional development program for all of their staff in their public schools. So I think that's going to be coming out in March. So we're going to see more and more kind of systemic efforts to upskill teachers, to integrate it into the classroom so that students know how to use this and use it appropriately. So I think maybe a little bit of a calming down, but I think we will start to see AI kind of become, I suppose I kind of compare where we're at the moment to the mid to late 90s of the internet.
Yeah.
So, I think I was only like 11 or 12, but I remember we got a computer and I think we sent it back after a few weeks to the store because I think my parents just kind of thought, well, what's the purpose? Yeah. We had basic email. Like if we look at like Google didn't come around till 98. We had basic browsers, but it was in the coming years. We had to get over that kind of that .com bubble of the early 2000s, and then we kind of get into the creation of social media and then mobile phones. You call a cell phone. So we get within that 10-year gap, we get a huge kind of settling down of what the internet is, and then we get the front runners in terms of the platforms that we use day to day and how we use those platforms come to the fore. I think we're still early on in that journey when it comes to artificial intelligence, but we'll push towards. I think we'll get there a lot faster than we did with the internet, but I think we'll start to see more and more platforms start to release, and I'm thinking of the big guys here, like Google and Microsoft, start to release something that's just a bit more substantial. And I suppose for the last 2 years, we've had AI as kind of been individual tools for people. So like you might have some teachers in your school who are using it, individual accounts and so on. And I think we'll start to see a more push towards more kind of enterprise level technology and more integration from an enterprise level, I think, as well. So yeah, I think we've got another. I can't say this slowing down too much. Yeah. I think we've got, because even if the front end innovation of these tools slows down a little bit, we've still got to integrate what's been created over the last few years. So I think we're going to see more of it around us and more progress with what these tools do, which I think they'll just emphasize more that this is part of life and we have to prepare our students for it if we've been ignoring that side of things so far.
Well, that, again, it gets me to the next question I wanted to ask you, which is about, how we think about innovation, right? In some of these bigger companies, like you mentioned, like a Microsoft, like a Google, right? Things might, be continuing this pathway, becoming more ubiquitous in our everyday lives. What does innovation look like in education as we're talking about, the use of AI? Maybe it's the enterprise accounts, like you mentioned. Are there other things people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I categorize innovation into two different categories. So I think I mentioned linear innovation. So I think this is kind of the type of innovation that schools tend to be really good at, I think. And that is looking at something new and going, well, how does this fit into what we're already doing?
Yeah.
How do we take a part of a tool or the full tool, and how do we make it support success? So we've got the same success metrics, we've got the same processes and systems. None of that really changes, but we just get an extra bit of efficiency or something like that. And that's how you see AI being used in education. 99% of the time at the moment. It's right. Does it? And you get they've become. It's crazy how fast this has gone, but it's become a cliche now. Like AI creating a lesson plan.
Exactly.
It's because it's the obvious innovation. Now, I think, and it might not be this year, but I think over the next 5 years, what we're going to have to do is start to think about a different type of innovation within education, and type of innovation that we're probably not used to, or most of us aren't used to, and that is the non-linear innovation, which is is kind of how do we recreate what we do to stay relevant, to put it bluntly. And that is simply because I think AI helps us do what we do, maybe a bit more faster, maybe a bit more
Yeah.
creatively. But I think if we read the signal and we understand how this might progress, that there's a real possibility that it could start to shake our
Mhm.
systems a bit. Now,
Mhm.
I'll give you one example. One really obvious one is that how many teachers out there have started to really question their methods of assessment over the last 2 years because of,
Mhm.
and assessment's the cornerstone of our education system. It's the pinnacle of where we get to as an end point, and it's also if you're doing teaching and learning really well, it's the starting point because then you assess and then you design the learning from that. So it's the real keystone within our education system. But already this technology is hovering a big question mark over the top of it in terms of do we lock it down further so
Yeah.
that or do we maybe get a bit more creative and dynamic with how we assess? And I think there's probably a bit of both in there. And I think we'll probably start to see that more and more as the technology becomes more ubiquitous. And so I think just simply making what we're doing more efficient probably won't cut it in the mid to long term. I think
Yeah.
we're probably going to have to start coming together and thinking, well, how do we do assessment in this type of world now? How do we? Because I'm not saying we don't assess. We obviously still need to assess. It's kind of the purpose of education to go right. Well,
Right.
or helps us fulfill the purpose to go.
Mhm.
Have our students progressed? Are they learning? But I think we have to start thinking of how do we do it? How do we renew it for this world of ubiquitous AI, which is what my new book's all about. Really, it's all
Yeah.
about how do we bring a group together to start asking these big questions and start designing something new for this new age.
Yeah, and I think, the efficiency piece, like you mentioned, is such like a first level, right? Or a foundation for understanding what's possible. But I agree with you. I think as we move forward into, 2025, right, there'll be a lot of light bulbs that go off to say, like, this is just a piece of this, right? This is just a component. Like, there's other things that we need to consider, particularly when we think about preparing kids, right, for this world where they're going to interact in AI spaces. So, what are you watching? What are you thinking about this year when it comes to, helping kids? Maybe they're not touching all the tools, right? But just helping them get prepared for the changes that are going to be in the spaces that they're navigating.
Yeah, there's so many ways I suppose this conversation could go. I suppose on probably one of the most basic levels is probably just acknowledging that our kids are using it, and I suppose in a similar way to where we kind of assume our students who are under 13 years old aren't using social media.
Right.
They probably are. So I think in a similar way, because AI is integrated into social media, I think the biggest or the most popular AI used by children is the AI in Snapchat. So
Mhm.
I think acknowledging that they're using it, and I think acknowledging that we've got to do something urgent if we haven't already done it, and that is to make students aware that we know what it is as
Yeah.
educators. We know the harms, but we also know the benefits, and share some basic tips for how to be good AI citizens, for
Yeah.
want of a better
Mhm.
term. And if your school has been doing this with digital media literacy
Right.
for a long time anyway, it's kind of just an addition to that, I suppose, with more emphasis on because it's a tool. You can literally imagine something in your head and bring it to life on a screen within a few seconds, really. And obviously that could be horrific in its use case, but it also
Mhm.
could be very, very beneficial and help our students to grow and to learn. So I think it's recognizing that our students have got a huge power and directing them with how to use it. I think that's probably the urgent thing. I think then it's building on top of that of, well, how do they work alongside it?
Yeah.
And being realistic about that, I think I think one of the things that education needs to do is prepare students for the world that exists, not for a world that we want to exist. And therefore being realistic that when our students go into the workplace eventually, that they probably will be asked if do they know how to use AI? Are they using AI? Do they have skills? And in fact, we're already starting to see some job specifications out there.
Yeah.
The requirement to be proficient at a tool like ChatGPT comes up quite a bit now, and it makes sense. I mean, if you're an employer,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, if you're going to go for the person who can use ChatGPT well, because they're almost bringing an assistant with them, a very knowledgeable assistant. So how do we make sure? And I think there is a fine line here. How do we prepare them to have the skills to use this in an appropriate way without it just being a tool for lazy work, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we all have moments of laziness. Some of us, I know I do, probably more than others, and so it can be a bit of a crutch sometimes. And I think that kind of cuts at the heart of, well, how are we preparing our young people in terms of the values they have, in terms of the curiosity they have, the desire to be authentically themselves, and therefore I think we probably have to do a bit of rearranging with what our curriculum, what our purpose is, in that. Whereas, and obviously from my accent, your listeners will realize I'm from England, and the English education system is very traditional. And I speak very much from kind of through that lens, but we're probably going to have to rework what we consider the essential work that students do within a school environment, I think. And a priority in this new world, I think, is going to have to be the character and the humanity of our students to live in a world dominated by AI. I think that's what's going to be valued more than just knowing things.
Yeah. And just, that idea that when we're preparing students for these spaces, part of it is simply acknowledging, right, that they're probably interacting with tools, whether they're pointing to it and saying that's an AI tool or not, right? And then looking at those bigger things that might already be part, right, of your curriculum, like a character education, for lack of, a different way of saying it, right? It's often, part of different things, but then also what it looks like if you're preparing them for digital literacy skills. Like there may be some roads inward or like a big step back, right, to take to say, what are we actually doing here that's going to be meaningful and relevant? So, Dan, as we finish up today, I want to make sure people know about your new book, Infinite Education, where they can connect with you, where can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, so it came out yesterday, so the 6th of January, Infinite Education, the 4-step strategy for change in an age of AI. So you can find out more at infiniteeducation.ai, and it will show you where you can get the book. And there's a lot of freebies around it. So there's a free book that goes alongside it, which you can download. It takes you through kind of the why, and we kind of touched upon a bit of this today. And then it takes you into the 4-step practical strategy for how to start having these conversations, how to think in a non-linear way, and how to then influence the rest of your organization to bring everybody with you.
Fantastic. Well, I will make sure to put all the links out so everyone can click and find and learn more. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
It was a lot of fun chatting with Dan today, and I want to finish up this podcast episode like we always do with a few key points to make this EdTech easy. Schools must rethink assessments for an AI-driven future. Teacher training is key for effective AI integration. Students need practical and ethical AI skills. Schools must embrace non-linear innovation strategies. Remember, you can find the full show notes for this episode, all the resources, including links to follow along with Dan's work and his new book by going to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode, number 301, or by clicking on the show notes or the link for today's episode right in the summary. It's in the description area wherever you're listening to this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by my new free quiz, Unlock the Best Way to Use Chatbots in Your Teaching. This quick 5-question quiz will help you figure out the best way to use AI this school year. Find out if AI can support your instructional planning and help you tackle your to-do list. Everyone who takes the quiz will also get a free ebook. Head to classtechtips.com/quiz to find my new quiz. Unlock the best way to use chatbots in your teaching. That's classtechtips.com/quiz. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.